All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the Dress for Success Twin Cities June Virtual Lunch and Learn. We are so excited to be able to host these events virtually, even though we aren't able to be getting together in person right now. I want to welcome anybody who's joining for the first time today. This is going to be a really great one for you to be joining. For those who are alumni and have joined us before, we are excited to have you again. So thank you either way. We're really looking forward to having you here. As we all know and have heard about in the past weeks, we know that George Floyd was murdered by police on May 25th by a Minneapolis police officer. And our community has truly come together and is still healing weeks after this event. This horrific event has really brought an urgency to the fight for racial justice. And Dress for Success Twin Cities continues to stand with our BIPOC community. If you are unfamiliar with that term, which I was until a few weeks ago, it stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. So we want you to know that we continue to support our clients during this painful time of unrest. We are here to mostly listen, to also support and continue to ensure that every woman we serve can define her own path to success, regardless of the color of her skin. What we focus on is empowering women through employment. So to give you a little bit, just a little perspective about how people of color continue to be affected by systemic racism, I want to just give you a few examples here. While more people of color have been affected by COVID-19 over the last few months, they are also the ones who have less access to healthcare. While many people believe that women won the right to vote in 1920, Black women were unable to vote until 1965. While white women make only 79 cents for every dollar that a white man makes, women of color have diverse, equitable, and inclusive hiring practices and work environments for women of color. We know that listening, learning, and amplifying Black voices is only the beginning. We'll start today. I'm going to be doing a Q&A session with Lila Kelly, who is a female entrepreneur whose business consults organizations on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. We will then hear stories and experiences from a few of our clients who are women of color. They will share with you how they have experienced professional environments. Before we begin our Q&A with Lila, I want to encourage everyone to have an open mind. Understand that we might not get it right every time, but that learning from our mistakes means that we are growing. Hello, Lila. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so eager to have your expertise and perspective on a few questions I have for you. I'll start off with the first question I have. So I think a great starting point is if a company wants to take a look at their hiring practices and work environment to ensure they are diverse, equitable, and inclusive, where do they even begin?
One thing with my D&I consulting, I specialize in the hiring process, particularly the interview processes where I did my own research because I saw a gap in information out there. Mm-hmm. So where do they begin really is to assess all of the practices and systems involved, and that's everything from recruiting, interviewing, hiring, and then into the retention piece because it's all connected. Yeah. And so, what that would involve is looking at just a example, and especially after George Floyd's murder, there has been a lot of talk about making change at the systemic level, at the institutional, racism level, which I'm really happy to hear. We'll see where it goes, but that's where the change needs to take place. And talking about the hiring process, that's looking at job descriptions. Are they accurate? Have updated job descriptions. A lot of positions that are being hired for, people have been in those positions sometimes for 30 years. And the job description has not kept up with the changes in that job. And then sometimes that person retires and leaves, and that job description never really gets the full, all the duties of that job. So accurate, updated job descriptions, and then interview questions that are based on the job description, and making sure that the key points of that job are covered in that interview, and not using a list of questions that somebody down the hall gave you or you found on the internet and they sounded like really good questions, which I've seen it all. And then to have a rating system. How do you rate the applicants' responses? And then to, as far as like a system and it all being connected, also the performance evaluations need to also be evaluating those employees based on what they were hired for, which it goes back to the job description and the interview questions. And so that's an example. And when I've done workshops on diversity in the interview and hiring process, when I talk about that sort of thing, I've actually had people ask me, well, are we talking about diversity here, or are we talking about HR practices? And my background is in HR, in diversity, both of those for over 20 years, and then also working with the applicants in the career transition field for my whole, for many years too. And so I bring all three of those perspectives to it. And I see that in what my response is, we're talking about both of those. Because if you take diversity and you put it on top of poor systems or broken systems, it's not going to work. So that change really needs to be made at the system level. And that's where you really need to start, and it's a big process. This work is not easy. So
I love that perspective. I really appreciate that. To think of it from that HR level, that there's, before you even dive into some of the heart of those conversations, you need to look at that HR system and figure out where those issues are. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's fantastic. So my next question is, many times there are policies or practices in place that have unconscious bias kind of embedded in them. So how can employers recognize this and eventually make that change?
That I can give you some specific examples. Again, with the hiring process and based on examples from my research and just many years of experience talking to different, not just people of color, but people with disabilities, LGBT, all kinds of diversity. But it's an example would be with the interview questions. And a lot of the interview questions that I see are commonly asked interview questions that have been around forever. And I talk about the skill of interviewing, both, this kind of work is multidimensional. So it's what the applicants bring, but it's also what the interviewers and hiring managers bring to that interaction when the applicant and interviewers and hiring managers come together. And so interview questions like, for example, tell me about your strengths, or what do you see as your biggest strengths? What do you think are your biggest accomplishments, work accomplishments? Why should we hire you? They're all really good questions and really good information to get from applicants. But a couple people, an American Indian woman who, again, my research was what has been your experience from the applicant's perspective? And what are some common cultural misunderstandings that you feel interviewers have had about you and people, who look like you or have that same cultural background as you? What are some of those cultural misunderstandings that you feel you have experienced being on that side? And we talk about unconscious bias, and this is an example. But American Indian woman said, to talk about my strengths, I come from a culture where you never put yourself up, just yourself as an individual. You always bring your community with you. Mm-hmm. And so to respond can be, impossible or very difficult to give that expected response that the interviewer in their mind is expecting. Mm-hmm. And there was a man who basically said the same thing. He said, to go in and to have to learn that. And it's a skill. And I'm not saying that all American Indians are all, Asian. I've heard people say when I've presented this who are, African American, Latino, from just about every background, say that, and even white males, that these are very difficult questions to respond to, to have to go in and brag about yourself. Mm-hmm. But if you have a cultural background, like this man whose Hmong said, to have to learn how to do that went against every fiber in my body, because in my culture, you just don't do that. You don't brag about yourself. You don't talk about your accomplishments. So, what I'm talking about is kind of there's the skill of interviewing, having good interview questions, mm-hmm. and on the applicant side, knowing what questions they're probably going to be asked and how to respond. But then there's the cultural competency part of that. Mm-hmm. And to really interview and hire in an equitable way, you really need both of those. Yeah. And it shouldn't matter whether the applicant is skilled at interviewing or not. Mm-hmm. A skilled and culturally competent interviewer and hiring manager would be able to identify the true skills, knowledge, and abilities of any applicant that mm-hmm. walks through their door.
Yeah, I think that for a lot of times it can all start with those hiring practices, right? Which leads into my next question, which is about company culture, because company culture is so important for job satisfaction, right? So how can, once we are getting these equitable and inclusive hiring practices, how can employers ensure that their culture is inclusive?
Mm-hmm. That gets back to, so I work with diversity, equity, inclusion in the hiring process, but I also work with DEI in organizational development. Mm-hmm. And it again needs to start with an assessment. If you want to make change at a system level, systemic, long-term results level, it's a lot of work. This isn't about training. Training does nothing unless there's follow-up. Unless the training is a part of a greater plan that's going to lead to the next step. It's about taking action steps and having a clearly defined goal. Having clearly defined goals around this work. Mm-hmm. Also, clear definitions of what that word diversity means. Mm-hmm. If you want equity and inclusion around diversity and be able to hire and retain a workforce that reflects the population you serve, mm-hmm. What are we talking about? I hear these terms even now, since George Floyd. These terms are being, the conversation has changed to, we need address systemic racism, mm-hmm. change things at the system level. At this point, it's just talk. They're not defining what that means. They're not really giving examples yet. And that's because this country, we've never done this before. Yeah. And so it really needs to be broken down into actionable steps, and it starts with, you know, an assessment process. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I know for myself, at least, it can seem the whole concept of, you know, getting rid of systemic racism seems like this huge thing to overcome. But when we, like you're saying, break it down into these almost like bite-sized nuggets, it becomes actionable and we can start to actually move forward. Um, I,
yeah, and it's real important to create that foundation with and starting with some of those clear goals defined and the definition of the terminology used. And then kind of build on that based on the assessment, because you're going to get to a point, if you're really doing the work right, where there's going to be conflict. And if you never reach conflict in an organization, you're not doing it right. You're not going to get anywhere. And that's an organization, my guess is probably doing training, some recruiting efforts. But if there's no I can give an example if you want. I worked in it was a school district. I was actually on staff on a temporary basis as a diversity and recruiting specialist in their HR department. So my role was to recruit more staff to reflect the population served. And a couple of things I did was I got, collaboration effort, team effort to clarify the minimum qualifications for an educational assistant position. It was, everybody agreed to that. About 4 or 5 months into my year there, 2 of the principals, we had like 6 different schools, wanted to hire 2 young white women. They didn't quite fit the minimum qualifications. And the point was they could see that they'd be excellent with the students. They've been able to hire people like this. And boy, did I get the pushback, because I wouldn't let them through. And I said, by the way, what about the applicants of color who are qualified? What are you doing with them? And I got such pushback that these were like friends of mine. I mean, and they still are afterwards. But it was about, they couldn't, there was a clear line that we all agreed on. And after that, at the end of the year that I was there, I got feedback from people when there was a whole group meeting, some of the staff, that was the most faces of color that they have ever seen in that district. And recently, an executive director, this was a number of years ago, I did this work. She said, I don't know what you did there, but that was a tipping point, and things changed after you were there. And if it wasn't for that, we pushed through that conflict then. And that's what needs to happen. Just one small example that needs to happen at a system level. If you don't hit that resistance, you're not gonna, and push through that. I don't think you're gonna get the change, long-term change.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I think that, when we think about diversity and inclusion in the workplace, we know that employers hold a lot of responsibility around that. But I think the big question for a lot of people right now is, how can individual employees kind of help foster that growth and change?
Boy, I think right now there's a lot of people open to that discussion. Hopefully open to listening more now. There's always power in numbers. Find out who will listen at the highest level possible in that organization. And I know you need to be real careful about going around your supervisor or whatever, but it could be a casual, couple of words passing in the hallway. And then, do you want to have lunch? I mean, this might be somebody more at your own level, but just try to start that conversation. I don't know. It's just, it really depends on the people, you know, that are willing to really risk that in some organizations. If they have employee resource groups or a diversity manager or whatever already in place, to talk to that person, but to keep following up on it and try to get some action out of that person. So it really depends on who's there and what the structure of that organization is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that many of us are, you know, that what you were talking about, listening, is such a key piece. And it's really a huge
Sorry.
part of what we want to focus on today during our lunch and learn too. So I want to
Sorry, I'm
invite
just going
you.
to try and.
This is what happens when we all work from home. It's totally fine.
That may go off again.
No worries. Well, Lila, I want to take this time to just thank you for your expertise. I know that this is such a huge topic and that these are going to be hard conversations that we're having with, you know, coworkers, friends, family, managers. But I think that for a lot of us, it's that listening piece is where this can all start.
Mhm.
And and
Absolutely.
we're just so grateful that you took the time with us today to start this conversation. It's, you know, something that we've been saying as we've been moving forward in all of this. It's, and what you were saying at the beginning, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. This isn't gonna
Mhm.
happen overnight. We have to do the hard work and we have to be uncomfortable. Um, so I appreciate you taking the time to be with me
Sure.
today, and I'm so grateful for your expertise. So thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome. Anytime.
Thank you, Lila. We'll talk to you later.
Yeah, well,
Thank you, Lila. I am so appreciative for Lila's expertise. And as I mentioned, it's this listening component for a lot of us to hear these different experiences from women of color, specifically in our organization, because we serve women. We want to hear their experiences. And so next, we'll be taking the opportunity to really amplify Black female voices. We have both Sandra and Felicia here with us today. And each of these women have proudly and bravely offered to share their stories with us. Experiences in the workforce for women of color look much different than their white female counterpart and vastly different from a white man's. So now is really our time to listen. So I'm going to bring in Sandra, who has been in sociology. She's been actively engaged in our professional intelligence courses. And I just want to thank you, Sandra, for joining us today. So, how are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm lovely. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to pass the mic, and you had mentioned an experience that you wanted to share, and it's your turn.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. Um, I want to share my experience. This is only one experience. This is the one that was really profound for me. Back in the 90s, I worked in a distribution center in Tennessee. Um, And in the distribution center that I worked in, we had a Black team leader. So what they did was they hired a shipping manager out of state. And they actually hired two people. Um, the other person was the director of operations, who was the shipping manager's boss. So they hired both of these guys from out of state. Um, And the thing that struck me about the newly hired shipping manager was how he interacted with the a black my fellow black coworkers. Because in the area that I worked in, it was mostly black. We had one white lady who worked with us also in the shipping department. Oh me. it brings back a lot of feelings now. So how he manager interacted with me and my other black coworkers, and it was just something funny about that. I felt some negative vibes from him, and I even discussed this with the team leader occasionally. So what I noticed that when I started filling orders, I would be at the top level, and I would look down while this shipping manager would be working on a computer. And one of our black coworkers came up and interacted with him or had a discussion with him. I noticed that after the my black coworker or coworkers would walk away, that he would frown up at them. His facial expression, but was completely different, and it was very, very negative. So I was watching him, but he didn't know I was watching him, observing him. So after some time of this going on and me discussing this with my black team leader, we just started noticing things, the way he would talk to us compared to our other white coworker. It was quite different. So one day, my white coworker was at the desk. Um, she was sifting through the orders, separating orders. He was at the computer desk because I know this because I was at the lower level to that particular day pulling orders, but I could see the both of them. So here comes the director of operations because I worked second shift. So we had a certain amount of orders that we had to get out before the shift was over. So the director of operations came through and was having a discussion with the shipping manager. And so I noticed that they had a brief discussion, and the director of operations walked away, walked out the shipping area. And I noticed that my white coworker that was sitting there shipping through the orders, she turned three shades of red. She was visibly upset. And I noticed that when I came back to the table to pick up another stack of orders, she said, I remember this clearly. She said, Holmes, come walk with me. And I said, okay, what's wrong? You look upset. What's wrong? So she said, walk with me. We walked over to another part of the warehouse, away from the shipping area. And she proceeded to tell me that she heard a discussion between the shipping manager and the director of operations. And she said that the shipping manager stated, well, I don't think we're going to get all these orders out in time. I think I might need some more help from other departments. And she said that the director of operations said, well, why don't you get your niggas to do it? I'm sorry to have to use that word, but she said that's the word that he used.
Mhm.
And by the time when she told me this, I wasn't shocked because I had already seen the behavior with the shipping manager. So it wasn't a shock to me. I saw the signs. So when we were having this discussion, we were over in the receiving department walking around, and then everybody knew her knew that something was wrong because she was visibly upset. And somebody, I remember a black guy walked up to her and asked her, what was wrong? Are you okay? She said, no, I'm not okay. She said, I just heard a racist statement. And he said, well, what did you hear? And she proceeded to tell him what she told me about the N word being used by the director of operations. So by that time, he went and told some people over in the receiving department. And then within like minutes, people had stopped working. People were visibly upset. And when we went back over to my department, it had spread like wildfire over in other departments about that N word being used by the director of operations. So when we came back over, the shipping manager, noticed that we had stopped working because again we had shared, she shared what she had heard with our fellow coworkers. And then when I discussed it with the team leader, I said, Vince, I said, this is, what do you think about with this, what she said? He told me, he said, you know what? He said, I I'm not surprised either. He said, it just goes back to what you've been telling me. He said, you told me that something was off about those two. I said, yep. And then he said, well, he said, I don't blame anybody for being upset or being angry. And what we did was that night, we kind of it's like a protest. What we did, we just stopped working. We didn't pull another order. We really didn't, because I felt some type of way that I have never felt before. I'm not saying that I was never exposed to, you know, um, unfair treatment. But this particular night, it was something different because I saw the signs that bothered me. But it just let me know just how things like this happens in the workplace. There's and then the fact of the matter was that they had this discussion in front of a white skinned lady. What they didn't know was that she was married to a black man and she had two biracial children. So that's why, in my opinion, as to why he felt free to use that N word, because he assumed that he was that because she looked like him, white skin like him, that she wouldn't be bothered by it. Well, it was a big mess that night and the next day. Because the culture of that workplace changed to where we had big group discussions with HR, with the higher ups in that company, and I was interviewed by HR, and I told them exactly what I'm saying to you, what I've just said to you, and it bothered me to the point where I didn't even want to work there anymore. You know, um, because I said if a place, and the way they handled that after all the uproar, I didn't agree with. They allowed those two, according to somebody in HR, would told me they allowed them to resign, so they didn't get terminated. Both of those guys resigned, and without anybody admitting to what was said. Instead of them, they mishandled the situation because and then it was like, well, they resigned, they're not here anymore, everything should go back to normal, everything should be okay, but it wasn't okay. The fact that something allowed that happened there, and then they kind of want to sweep it under the rug and just put the fire out by we'll be hosting a couple of dinners and lunches for you all to show our appreciation. That wasn't sufficient. It wasn't that. And to this day, I see, I think about it, and I think how not only companies like that, how they mishandle situations like that. They don't want to talk about the so-called racism. And for me, that term racism is problematic because, according to what I've learned and studied in sociology for over 4 or 5 years, that race is actually, in actuality, a social and political concept. It was socially constructed in order to categorize and label people. And this statement is according to the American Sociological Association. If anybody wants to look it up. But what I've come to understand, what we're dealing with in reality is white supremacy and white privilege. Now, white supremacy, according to dismantlingracism.org, this is this website I referred to. White supremacy is an ideology that white people and ideas, the thoughts, the beliefs, and actions are superior to people of color. And when we're talking about race and in the workplace, then for me, that example of what I went through, what I come to understand now was actually an action of white supremacy. It had nothing to do with race, because race is not a real thing. It's just a political and social construct, from what I know now. So, the fact that the way that situation was handled, and it is handled like that all the time, all over. Since I've left, which I actually left that place like less than a year later. because I couldn't bring myself to continue to keep working there. And the attitude of the higher ups was to sweep everything under the rug and not openly talk about it and not have a dialogue like we're doing today,
Yeah,
you know. So
absolutely.
yeah, so for me, I think we need how we begin to address this very serious social problem is that we first need to, understand the concept of race, because it's not real.
Hmm.
But the problem that we're having now, what we're experiencing right now, is what we saw in Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago, is white supremacy.
Hmm.
And once we attack it, once we look at it from that area, then we can start to really make change, because then we can dismantle the system, and this system needs to be dismantled because it's all backed by white supremacy.
Hmm. Sandra, I'm so thankful for your sharing your experience, and also because of your unique background in sociology. I think it gives us a unique perspective. I appreciate you sharing, and I think that what I'm seeing in some organizations right now is different than the past method that you were talking about, where it's a small thing that they try and do to fix what happened, but then it's just swept under the rug. I think that there are some organizations that are breaking out and starting to have those conversations, and I'm hoping that as we begin to have those conversations and hear experiences like yours, more organizations are gonna get on board and start to hear that. So thank you very much for sharing today. I appreciate it. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Um, there's not. I don't think there's any more that I can add. The one thing that I wanted to really magnify and highlight was that we need to first of all understand the differences between the concept of race and white supremacy, because that's more important to
Mhm.
understand the ideology and ideas that's rooted in not just in employment. We talking about healthcare and housing and
Mhm.
education. I mean, it permeates our entire system. So these are the conversations that we need to have, and this dialogue that we're having today is a start, and it's a good
Mhm.
start.
Yeah, and
So
there's a
thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to share that my brief experience
absolutely.
with
Thank you so
yeah.
much, Sandra. I appreciate it. And this is just wonderful to hear your experience. And this is just the beginning of the conversation, right? There's hard work to be done. So thank you for joining
Right.
us. I appreciate it. I'm
Thank
going
you.
I'm going to introduce Felicia next. She is incredibly data and tech savvy. This woman just blows me away. She is in a computer networking position and graduated from the Dress for Success Twin Cities Professional Intelligence Program back in 2018. So I'm excited to bring Felicia in. We'll hear her experience. Hi, Felicia. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Can you hear me?
I can. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you, Anna, for giving me an opportunity to speak on this platform.
Yeah, please. I'm excited for you to share, and I'm here to pass the mic and just listen.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sandra. She hit a lot of points. I was trying to put my resource that I'm taking the information from into the chat, so it wouldn't let me do it. But I'm going to give it to you so that you can post it, so that if people want to read this article. It's an article that's written by Camille Everett, and let me get this. It's called "Black Women Talk About Workplace Stress and How They Cope." And the reason why I wanted to bring the article is, my experience and background of what I do. And so I wanted to identify some things and help people understand what it means about racism. Racism is not just the color of my skin, but there's all types of racism. And then we can talk about more of my experiences. Okay, so one of the things in the article, this is on page 211, and it's talking about stresses in the workplace. First, before we get started, well, let me just go ahead and start here. So the one thing this article talked about is discrimination in the workplace against Black female workers comes in the form of stereotypes, excessive demands, an absence of mentoring, exclusion from work, office cliques, being ignored and or harassed, and assumptions that they are incompetent. Alternatively, racist bias in the workplace has been conceptualized along two distinct dimensions of institutional discrimination, interpersonal prejudice. Institutional discrimination referred to organizational policies and procedures and unfairly restrict the opportunities of Black Americans or that perpetual advantages or privilege for the majority group. Conversely, interpersonal prejudice refers to the negative beliefs, attitudes, and feelings towards Black Americans, action, and behavior that are based on them. That also include discriminatory language. They also found that they were excluded from informal social networks in the workplace, were presumed to be incompetent, and were expected to perform exaggerated levels. And it's really true because I had a lot of experience. I can't mention the names of where I work at, but in the workplace, the first thing I would tell you would be the lack of mentorship. I remember working for one position that I was hired on. I have all the skills, the qualifications, I can communicate, I have very good interpersonal skills. When you're hired, it's not so much as the higher management, but also your team that you're placed on, being able to have team collaboration. Sometimes the team may not be as welcoming as the management team. If the management who is hiring diversified candidates, the team may not be, especially if they've been there for a long time, may not be as welcome. So for me, I think one of the things that company would need to do is educate other employees about racism, what forms, as I just mentioned here, that can fall into. When I got hired on at the last position I was in, one of the things I noticed in all of what I see a pattern in all the positions that I was in is mentorship. I'm a computer network engineer. Okay, so I know how to run a computer network. I know how to set up computers. I know how to do a lot of things. But when you're hired onto a particular company, I will have to be mentored and taught the policies and procedures and the conformity of what they do on that particular job. That means that I will have to have a mentor on that team who is well equipped, well able, and competent to train me to be the best employee to give out to their clients and organization. What I found is that they don't adequately do that. I will say that one thing I look for is data. I'm always looking for some kind of handbook or some kind of leadership. I need to know what the hierarchy of leadership is. Sometimes I'll always know that, or I'm just left in the dark. It's like, okay, you're hired, here's the book, you read it, bam, that's it. There is no cordial or legitimate mentorship. I did have one position where I was filling in for a coworker that was going on maternity leave, and I told him, I said, I can do very well in my job. I just need to know everything. I need to know all the issues that you come in contact with, how you resolve them, and I need to know all my resources so that I won't be in the dark and not knowing what to do. And I can say that was the only job that he really sat by me and made sure I understood what was said. Sometime in the workplace, coworkers or just people in the workplace may feel like they don't have to show us, or we should assume that we already know it. So some of the challenges I always had was just being able to just being functional on my job, knowing what stuff is, or they'll show me when the training goes, they go, oh, this, and this, and this, and they flip and they run through it so fast. It's like, I don't know what you just said, And so then what it does, it restricts me to do my job correctly because I haven't been trained. So what I started doing, how I hope what happened in there is that I start taking notes. Who trained me, when, and what time, and what happened, so that if something happens, that I can I can say, hey, you know what, so and so showed me this. Is that not correct? Because now on the job, African American, we have to cover ourselves as well, because there are people on the job that will kind of throw you on the bus, and they haven't properly showed you, or they're expecting you to know it the first time that you are you're in training. So I will say that the training can be one part where you don't have a lot of mentorship. The other issues, and I'll give you an example of that. In some of the teams that I had on, most of the time, some of the comments are sarcastic, or they're demeaning when it comes to, oh, you probably won't know how to do this, but I'm gonna show you how to do this. That's what we mean about showing racism or something like that. Where when your other coworkers come in, you may not show that. So there's a different form of racism in the workplace. So we have to be cautious when we're interacting with other people. Sometimes I experience it more in the management. I had an issue one time, and it's kind of more like this person had other issues. He was supposed to train when I got hired on, and he was a white, I'm gonna say female, and I say that because there was some other things going on with that too that I didn't know about, but I respect him as his decision. And I was only on my job for like 2 weeks and things like that. And the next thing you know, I'm calling to the office, and they told me, hey, you know, so and so said you tried to do this and this and that. I said, no, I didn't. I said that how this person, what that person chose their lifestyle, that's them. But they wasn't. Thank God for my manager who was able to listen to me, because they were gonna fire me that day. And I'm like, what? Just no questions asked or anything like that. They were just gonna fire me on the spot. But thank God that someone stepped in. The higher up manager stepped in and told me what was going on. But prior to that, on the job, I was giving more work, and some of the work they're giving me, they knew I couldn't do because I haven't even been trained on that particular project. And so it really kind of left me feeling insecure and just kind of like set me up for failure, pretty much. That's some of the things that can happen in the workplace. So the one thing I will say that some of the things that African American people do is coping, and the article mentions this as well. First, before I do that, because I want to really tell you the 4 things that we experience the most is being hired or promoted in the workplace. That is always hard. I've seen colleagues where I had the same exact skills, perform at a better pace, or been able to prove it myself, where my colleague had got a promotion where I knew that I was, up for it. But, for me, it didn't bother me, but a lot of people will be, because we want to be able to have the opportunity for leadership. You don't really see a lot of African American in leadership, or have leadership opportunities or training, even though we do have the capability, because we're always identified as we're not good enough or incompetent. So being hired or promoted in the workplace, 2, defending one's race and lack of mentorship, as I mentioned, and shifting or code switching to overcome barriers to employment. We have, it can be sometimes with an employment application, there's a lot of requirements that a person may have. We may not, a lot of us may not have like a bachelor's degree like I have, or I was one applying for a position, and they was gonna hire me, but the one thing at that particular time I was told is that I didn't have my degree, so they couldn't hire me. And if they did hire me, they only could hire me part-time, and then I wouldn't get paid as much if I did have a bachelor's degree. So, and then number 4, coping with racism and discrimination. I'm sorry, there'll be 5, and being isolated and excluded. Now, there were times in my position where I wouldn't be invited to things, or there would be meetings that are held, and I wouldn't be called to the meeting, even though I'm part of that team. And as a team member, you need to be at those meetings so that you can know what's going on, so that you'll be able to answer questions of your clients. Most of the time, I was excluded from a lot of the meetings, or excluded from conversation in the meeting, or for asking questions. And that's really hard for the worker because they may have insight that the colleague may not have, or they may see things. And then when I have suggested or made my comments to a certain particular issue, it was debunked. Like, okay, you don't know what you're talking about. And I know what I'm talking. Then later I find out they go along right what I just mentioned. I'm like, okay, I tried to tell you, but those kind of things that I haven't really had a lot of racial slurs. I do confront those issues right away. And I have lost a lot of jobs because my intolerance of that type of behavior, because I believe that every person should be treated equally and respectfully. And I believe in relationships. And I have had issues where I was working at this one job, and I don't know what the training person problem was, but she really wasn't educating me at all. But what she was doing is exercising her control over me. Basically wanted me to do certain things, or was showing favoritism for everybody in the class. I raised my hand, asked a question, and it wouldn't get answered, or something like that. And it was really hard for me. And then, she was always humiliating me or saying sarcastic remarks or putting me on the spot. And those are the type of things that they do in those kind of jobs. Or I had another job where, I count my drawer all the time. I had my manager was stealing from the company. And what I noticed is that she was dropping money underneath the table and things like that. And so it's like, are they going to listen to me if I tell them, hey, my manager is doing illegal things here? They don't always listen to our, complaints or anything like that. They see them as we're being complaining or causing trouble. And then we're the one that get fired or pay the consequences for somebody else's irresponsibility. And I'm not saying that, you can't apprehend us, because we do be responsible for what we do. But the other person seems to get off on what they do, and it's an unequal balance. I don't know if anyone has any questions for me before I continue. Do you have any questions at all for me yet?
I can see right now. I'm not very good at monitoring the chat. I'm going to be completely honest. Bryn, I think you know Bryn. She said, really getting a lot from Felicia. Awesome. So there we go. Thank you for sharing those experiences.
I've experienced a lot, and even because I do have some disability on top of that, where you may not, I don't even know if you even knew, Anna, that, I have hearing loss. And, boy, I have an issue where the lady told me, like, I have my coworker, my white coworker will say, hey, I got this and this, and they'll provide all the resources that they need. And so one of the things, and even my daughter and I, we talk about this frequently, about her getting supplies that she needs. I would have to go buy my supplies, because when I would ask for supplies, what do you need this for? Okay, or it was an inconvenience for them. So I would go take my own money and buy my own supplies. I didn't want their supplies, because sometimes I don't want to be blamed for stuff that was taken or anything. So I would go buy my own markers or buy my own supplies. In fact, I had to buy my daughter. I told her, don't even worry about it, because she's a master teacher. And so her and I was talking about how even on her job, my daughter is very highly skilled. She's very articulate, and she's very creative in her work with children. And she can take a child that is doing at 20% and get them to be at grade level or above. And the children respect her and respect everyone in there. And some people get intimidated by that, because they don't think that we should have that type of credential or that capability of interacting with the general public. We can be influential to other people. So a lot of white peers feel like Black people are not supposed to be, I don't know what they're watching or what they're listening to, but they don't understand that we too can be influential. We can bring, bring up sales and those kinds of things. If they, if we're given the opportunity and a chance, instead of being underestimating our ability, you would see a lot. For her, I said, you know what? I will buy it for you. And then I told her, I coached her, I said, this is what you need to do. I said, when you want to, if something's not going right, and you know, a lot of people may not know how to advocate for themselves. I've learned how to advocate for myself because of the experiences I had over the years. So I told my daughter, this is what you got to do. Go find that policy and procedure book. Look at your, because the first thing they do, well, the policies and the procedures says this and this and this and that. I'm like, okay, I got you. So this is what the policy said, but this is, and then what happens is, oh, you know, I'm sorry about that. This is outdated material. And I'm like, okay, well, we need to update it, because then if you are saying that I'm supposed to be doing this, but then this doesn't say this, then we're not matching up. So I told my daughter to go and talk to the boss and just be factual and logical, and, you know, hey, this is what this is, I ordered this, and, you know, and she did that, and she's like, well, you shouldn't have to buy your own supplies and things like that. I said, well, you know, these are the things that I need if I'm going to be successful. Sometimes what people don't understand is that the difference between our culture and majority culture is our resources. We may not have a whole lot of resources like the white Caucasian, our white counterparts or other people. We don't have a lot, especially when we're working. If we haven't worked in a while, we may not have transportation or different things that we experience that they may not experience. Doesn't make them better than we are, but it just means that we just don't have a lot of resources. You do have a lot of African Americans do have a lot of resources. They may be in, and that's any person. It doesn't have to be black or white. Any person may not have the exact tools or the resources to be successful. So you got to weigh that out too, you know. And that person may not dress like you because they may not have a suit and tie, Armani suit or anything, like stuff that you shouldn't even be worried about in that culture. So those are the things that we have to come up against. You know, it's not so much racism, but it can be our economical status, our social status, the way we dress, the way we talk. It's always something. Sometimes people see the African American louder than others. I don't know why that is, because our voice. I mean, I have a lot of voice. But I'm not arguing. They may think we're arguing or fighting or something like that. And that's not all too. So being cultural aware that people do different things in culture. Like in our culture, we're taught, our parents teach us to look each other in the eye when we're speaking. Okay. Then sometimes if we're staying too hard, we look away, because then we're taught, hey, you know, sometimes it's deemed as getting smart or whatever. So you got to be aware of the culture habits and things like that you have in each culture, so that you won't, you know, be offended by that.
Absolutely. I appreciate your very specific instances too. I think especially if you don't have a lot of diversity in your workplace, you don't necessarily even hear about these types of instances that you've experienced. So just hearing your story and your willingness to share about how you're mentoring your daughter too, that really brightened my heart. You know, that you have really, I've seen you advocate for yourself a lot, and knowing that you're doing that and teaching your daughter that, it's wonderful.
It's hard. I mean, I've got let go for a lot of positions because of they don't expect that from you. I mean, I advocate for my children. I mean, you know, my background, I went to school as a paralegal, so I could research things out. There's a lot of things. I had one lady, I was sitting down, and it probably was the way I was dressed. I was just basically was working out, and I was sitting at the restaurant in the place that I worked. I don't know what this lady was talking about, but she was a nice white lady, came by, sat by me, and she just assumed, I don't want to say idiot, but like I was incompetent, or just, went from here all the way down real quick. And she was like, I bet you something. I don't know if she said you know how to read or something she said, and she was just talking to me. And then I said, well, I happen to have 2 bachelor's degrees, and I also have an associate as a paralegal and a graduate as a psychologist. And she looked at me like, oh, okay. And she apologized to me because she automatically assumed that I had no educational background, or I don't have any type of formal training because of the way I looked or something like that, where I just came off a 2-mile walk, you know, from working out and things like that. And so she had just assumed that because I didn't speak and talk and act like her, that I didn't have educated background. The other thing is too is language. There's a big language barrier between our culture, the way we speak. Is when I was interacting with someone, they could never understand me. I'm like, I'm talking normal like you. What do you mean you don't understand? They just don't want to understand because they don't want to hear what we have to say. So my suggestion to a lot of people, if you're looking to add diversity, to learn about our culture and to learn, you don't have to act like us, like, yeah, what's up? Because all Black Americans don't talk like that. Okay, all Black Americans don't speak slang language. Okay, some have formal communications. For me, I like formal communication, and I like for someone to say hi. In the workplace, they'll even call you by your name. They just assume things. And for me, it was like, okay, if you call me by my name, Felicia, or address me in a formal manner, then I'll be more responsive. So you just really have to be aware of cultural when you're interacting with our culture.
Thank you so much for sharing today, Felicia. I really appreciate your perspective, and I'm just glad that we can let your voice be heard, because I think that is something that we have been lacking in our society, and this is just a great way to start the conversation. And we know that these conversations might be hard, and some people might be uncomfortable, but that's okay, because being uncomfortable means we're growing. So thank you for taking the time to be with me today and share your story. And we will have more conversations and hear more from you as time goes on. So thank you for taking the time. We'll talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I enjoy everything, and I do appreciate those who've given us your chance and been mentoring. I love Dress Assess for the way that you have a diversity of women. You have the programs and not discriminative of how a person looks, and you want to help out. So, I always say, if you're interested in supporting Dress Assess, please do, because they really do reach out to all types. I was so applauded when I come into the classroom and there's people from all different cultures. You got people from India, you got people from, I don't know, all over, Spanish, just different people, all in a different bracket here. And it really helps to have that diversity, because you learn from different cultures. You really do. And when you have that diversity and the inclusion, it makes a better workplace. And, even though I had some issues on my team at my last workplace, the fact of the matter is that they were inclusive. What I mean, like, I got along with everybody on the outside that was not on my team. The issue with me was that I knew what I was doing, pretty much, and that was intimidating. I had to take a 5-step back and lower myself. Well, not lower myself to a point where, embarrassing, but just kind of like not be like, okay, I'm gonna just let them tell me what they want to do. I'm gonna let them, say what they have to say. But going back to the sarcastic remark, there was things that they would say that was like, okay, it was stressing me out. And so I had to, when I started to pull the person aside, and I said, I really like working with you guys, and it's really a wonderful experience. But what I don't like is this. And sometimes when you do stand up or advocate for yourself, the one thing a person, African American, I mean, it may happen to all people, but it's worse for us. So what happened was, I did that. Now I'm challenging that person's behavior. So one day he comes up with a box, and he took the box, and I was sitting just like I'm sitting now on a call with a customer, and he comes around and he goes, throw it here. He throws the box at me, and there was a cup of coffee on my table, and it spilled on my nice dress that I had on, because I was happy to go on the day after work, and it spilled on my dress. And I'm sitting, one thing I learned is you have to either go into fight or flight mode. And I'm like, okay, should I just punch this dude, or I had to contain myself. And I was really hurtful by that, because that wasn't the first time, but that was like the first time he ever would literally not pour something on me. He didn't say sorry, because it's not like I knew it was going to fall on you, but you threw the box over the I forget what you call it, over my desk. And I mean, he just literally threw it. And I try to tell my boss that, but my boss, because he has such a high social status and credential with my boss, they're not going to believe me. You know what I mean? So what did people do? They either look for another job or another position instead of staying in that position because you really can't do too much because they have a higher credential. They've been there the longest and they have a good reputation and you're new on the team and you know what are they gonna listen to me for? So that was a hard issue for me to deal with. But it's like, okay, you know, so I started reaching out to everybody else and, you know, do what I had to do. And so those are the things that you have, and hopefully that it will change. Hopefully it will change, but you know you have to be open when a person of color, which I don't, come to you and say, "Hey, I'm having an issue with my coworker." You can't be like, well, "What did you do?" or anything like that. You have to be able to weigh both of them out and hold each party accountable, even if he is your top lead. He still he or she does. They do make mistakes. They do things that are illegal too, and they do make mistakes. So just they have to be willing to look at both that top team, say, hey, maybe he is doing this and correct it, so that that person be comfortable in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so appreciative of your perspective, and I know that what I've heard from a lot of our women as they've been sharing their stories, and what I've heard from you is that there's this fear of when you speak the truth that you are going to be let go. Like that's a very unfair fear to have. So I appreciate you sharing that perspective because I've heard that from many women, and I think that's not something that especially many white folks experience. So getting that perspective from you and understanding that, you know, maybe those hiring practices are diverse and you're able to get your foot in the door, but then the inclusive practices are lacking. And I think that's really important for a lot of employers to hear and to start looking inward. So I appreciate that you shared that today. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us before we wrap up?
Well, you know, stuff I don't even remember stuff until after the. But the one thing I want to say, and there's a lot of resources, but the hearing for us firsthand is number one. On page 209 in that document is 20. I think it's 20 pages. I'm not sure. It's a lot of pages. No, it's 300 pages. But on page 209 on the resources, the one thing I like, it says the usual stressor of the working environment may be unbearable because Black women can be easily singled out and treated differently than their colleague. And that is true. That is so true. I mean, I can't even tell you. I always step my game up. You know, I try to do. And then sometimes I just be quiet because I don't say anything because you know I have to work. And sometimes a lot of people won't say anything because they don't want to get fired for their positions for being advocating and you know taking up for themselves. You know because you have to do that. You really do have to do that. And we're easily singled out because they just automatically assume. And I even said too because I was remembering when they was doing the teams, they had all, and I'm happy that they hired 3 African American women. Now 2 of them were from Africa, and I was the only one. Well, see, I'm from France, so it's like anyway, I got a long history. This particular woman, they don't get treated as worse as we do when you have someone that's coming from Ghana or things like that. Okay, so you understand that when they're coming from overseas, they're treated a little bit more different than African Americans here in America. There's a big difference, and that's a whole nother topic, but it's a big difference. And so not only had to deal with that, but it was the fact that I'm an intelligent woman, and that's very intimidating to a lot of people. You know, but it's like for us, it's just singles it out. I'll give you an example. So one of the things is say that we're always late. Well, that's not true because I told my daughter, if you show up early, you will see how late they really are. That's a myth that Black people are always late. That's not true. Okay, that is not true because what I noticed is that if I was late, that was another thing of what you saw that was unequalness in the workplace is that if I showed up late, if I called in and I can be dying sick, I can't come in. I'm sick, and I rarely call in. And it has to be like I'm on my deathbed. I can't get up and move. If you don't come in, you may not have a job. Oh, but my white counterpart, they can skip work, they can take off of work, no problem. They come in late, no problem. But when it's black person coming in, like, oh my God, the whole world comes to an end. And that's I'm telling you, it was like I'm sitting here like I will follow the rules. I'll put in like a 3 month in advance of time off that I need, right? And if I take time off, when I come back, it's like it's wrong for me to take time off. But I'm sitting here watching my counterparts, like they come in late, they get sick, they're not there. But if I'm late or sick or I gotta leave early, it's not okay. It's not okay for me to do that. You know what I mean? I can see my coworker over here on Facebook, and I don't do that anyway on my job because when I'm there, they know I come and work. They on Facebook and all these other social media and stuff are doing all kind of stuff, but because they're good at their job, it's okay for them to do that. They don't have the company may not have any policy. They'll let them do that prior to me coming on. But if I got on Facebook, then they make a rule. No Facebook. But before everybody was on Facebook or some other social media playing games. We had one guy who was playing games. It was affecting me at work because I didn't fit in. Okay, I was working, and it was hard for me to focus when I'm hearing Super Mario in the back or something, or I'm hearing this over there and they're playing game. It was just very distracting to me to function when I'm seeing my coworkers off the hook doing whatever. So I tried. I said, okay, I'm gonna take foot. So and I just went into it. Next thing you know, it's like, no, you can't get on Facebook. I'm like, well, everybody else on there. Well, it's not everybody else, but they were on there every day. And so that's what I mean about, and that also can come across as being discriminative because you have one thing for another person that should be around all people. All of a sudden, they make rules and regulations that wasn't in place or enforcing that wasn't in place until an African American person come on the scene and they want to make all the rules and stuff like that. So that, or like I would show up early all the time. So, and I literally would show up about sometime anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour early. And the reason for that is because it takes me a longer time to wind out. It takes 25 minutes for your computer to come up and then all this other stuff to get the applications fixed up. It just takes a long time because when your computer, they have to go through the system check, they have to do the virus check, all these different things. It takes forever for that to come up. And I wanted to be ready. And so that's what I did. I was just like, okay, I had one work. I said, what am I doing different? He would tell me. So, I would show up. I would be the first one to go out there and got everything ready because they always say that black people lazy. I'm not lazy. Ooh, Lord, I'm not lazy. I was the first one out there. I was setting up the computer tables. I was wiping down everything. I was on top of it because I don't want them to know that I can do this position and I'm well fitted for this. But in the same time, my relationship with them was very important because if we don't have a good team, then everybody just seemed to disintegrate. And then there's a lot of controversy. And so there's got to be something in place where the platform could be where we can talk like we're talking out and come up with resolutions of how we fix the issue. But then they have to be willing to listen to us, listen to our side, how we're feeling and what we're projecting, because what you see and what I see may be a whole lot different. So you have to come to a mutual meeting of minds and understand that we have feelings too. We are valuable as well. But that's pretty much what goes on. And there's a lot of things, but that's all I can think of at the moment of the type of things that we go through in the workplace.
Thank you so much, Felicia. I appreciate Great.
Yeah, we just held to a higher standard than most of them.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, and like I mentioned, this is just the beginning of the conversations that need to happen, across our country, for us to really move forward and break down these different systems. So thank you for being a part of that and sharing your experience, because this is just the beginning, and I'm just so thankful. So we'll talk to you later, okay?
Yes.
Thank you, Felicia. Bye-bye. Awesome. I know that we went a little longer today than our usual virtual lunch and learn, but wow, I think we really needed that. And I'm just so grateful for the different perspectives. And I hope you were listening intently to these different stories um, of what it can really be like for women of color in the workforce. I also want to thank again Lila, who joined us at the beginning and gave her perspective as a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert. So that was wonderful. And I just want to remind everybody as we continue to fight for equality that, this is a marathon, not a sprint. There is some seriously hard work to be done. And by taking the time today, you are helping us move one step closer to breaking down the systems that have perpetuated um, this these racist issues that we have in our country. So we are so very grateful that we're able to come together virtually. I also want to give a shout out to my development intern Hannah, who is on the back end doing some wonderful logistic pieces for us. So thank you to her. And I also want to remind you that we have a lovely recommended donation if you are able. We would love it if you are able to do a $10 donation. That would be phenomenal. And we thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Bye.